The December wind cut through Jake Morrison's worn jacket as he stood on the porch of his family's ranch house, staring at the foreclosure notice in his weathered hands. The paper trembled, though whether from the cold or his shaking fingers he couldn't tell. 3 months. That's all the time he had left before the bank would seize the Double M ranch that had been in his family for 4 generations. At 32, Jake had never imagined he'd be facing the loss of everything his great-grandfather had built from nothing. The ranch sprawled across 800 acres of prime Montana cattle country. But prime land meant nothing when you couldn't afford to keep it running. The drought last summer had wiped out most of their hay crop, forcing him to sell half his cattle herd at rock-bottom prices just to pay the feed bills for the remaining animals. His younger sister Emma had been after him for months to consider alternative solutions. "Jake, you're too proud for your own good," she'd said during their last phone conversation from her apartment in Denver. "There are programs, loans, maybe even investors who'd be interested in partnering with you." But Jake knew the truth that Emma, despite her business degree and city smarts, couldn't quite grasp. The ranch was hemorrhaging money faster than any loan could fix. The old equipment needed constant repairs he couldn't afford, the fencing was falling apart in a dozen places, and the cattle prices had been dropping steadily for 2 years. Even if he managed to scrape together enough for the overdue mortgage payments, he'd just be delaying the inevitable. The sound of tires on gravel pulled him from his thoughts. A silver pickup truck was making its way up the long driveway, kicking up dust despite the recent snow. Jake folded the foreclosure notice and stuffed it into his back pocket as he recognized the vehicle. It belonged to his neighbor and longtime family friend, Bill Hendricks, who owned the prosperous Lazy H ranch 3 miles down the road. Bill climbed out of his truck with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who'd spent 65 years working cattle and fixing fence. His weathered face bore the permanent squint lines of someone who'd spent most of his life looking across open rangeland, and his gray mustache was neatly trimmed beneath a nose that had been broken twice in his rodeo days. "Jake," Bill nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "Got a minute to talk?" "Always got time for you, Bill. Coffee's fresh if you want some." They settled at the kitchen table that had served the Morrison family for decades. The wood was scarred and stained from years of use, but it was solid oak built to last. Jake poured 2 cups of black coffee from the pot that seemed to be perpetually brewing, a necessity for anyone running cattle in Montana. Bill wrapped his gnarled hands around the mug and studied Jake's face. "You look like hell, son." Jake managed a tired smile. "Feel about the same. I'm guessing this isn't just a social call." "You'd be right." Bill leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Emma called me yesterday. Told me about the foreclosure notice." Jake's jaw tightened. His sister meant well, but her interference often felt more like betrayal. "She had no right to." "She's worried about you," Bill interrupted. "We all are. This ranch has been Morrison land since 1889. Seems like a damn shame to let the bank take it because of a run of bad luck." "It's more than bad luck, Bill, and you know it. Small operations like ours are dying out. The big corporate ranches can weather the storms that sink family operations. Maybe it's just time to accept that." Bill was quiet for a long moment, sipping his coffee and studying the steam rising from his cup. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of friendship and hard-earned wisdom. "I got a proposition for you," he said slowly. "Might sound a little unconventional, but hear me out." Jake raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, gesturing for Bill to continue. "You know my situation. Lost Martha 3 years ago. Kids are all scattered to the 4 winds. Got a ranch twice the size of yours running smooth as silk, but no one to pass it on to. Been thinking about what comes next for the Lazy H." Jake nodded. Bill's wife had died suddenly of a heart attack, leaving him alone on their successful ranch. His 3 children lived in different states, none of them interested in returning to rural Montana to continue the family business. Here's what I'm thinking, Bill continued. What if there was a way to merge our operations? Your land connects to mine on the south border. Together, we'd have over 1,500 acres of prime grazing land. Could run 3 times the cattle we're running separately. Bill, I appreciate the thought, but I can't afford to buy into your operation. And I sure as hell can't ask you to take on my debts. I'm not talking about a business merger, Jake. I'm talking about a family merger. Jake stared at his friend, confused. I'm not following. Bill reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph, placing it face down on the table between them. My niece Sarah, Martha's brother's girl from back east. She's 28, smart as a whip, and looking for a fresh start after a messy divorce. Been helping her uncle run a horse breeding operation in Virginia for the past 5 years. Jake looked down at the photograph, but didn't pick it up. Bill, what exactly are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you two get married. Before Christmas. The words hung in the air between them, like smoke from a branding fire. Jake felt his coffee cup slip slightly in his hands, and set it down carefully on the table. You want me to marry a complete stranger to save my ranch. I want you to marry a good woman who could help save both our ranches, Bill corrected. Sarah's got a head for business, knows cattle and horses, and she's looking for a place to belong. You need someone with capital and expertise to help turn this place around. Seems like it could benefit everyone involved. Jake picked up the photograph and turned it over. The woman looking back at him had shoulder-length brown hair, intelligent brown eyes, and a gentle smile. She was pretty in an understated way, the kind of natural beauty that didn't need makeup or fancy clothes to shine through. But what struck him most was something in her expression, a combination of strength and vulnerability that seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. She knows about this plan of yours? We've discussed it. She's interested in meeting you, seeing the ranch. Interested in the possibility, anyway. Jake set the photo down and rubbed his forehead. The idea was insane, but then again his entire situation was insane. Bill, I can't ask someone to marry me just to solve my financial problems. That's not fair to her or to me. You're not asking. I'm suggesting. And it wouldn't just be a business arrangement. Sarah's a good woman, Jake. Give it a chance, and you might find it could be something real. What about her? What does she get out of this besides a failing ranch and a husband she's never met? Bill leaned forward, his expression growing serious. Sarah's been through hell, Jake. Her ex-husband was a piece of work, took her for everything she had in the divorce. She's been staying with her uncle, but that's not a permanent solution. She wants her own place, her own life, and she's got some money saved up from her work with the horses. Enough to make a difference here if it's managed right. Jake studied the photograph again. There was something about Sarah's eyes that suggested she'd seen her share of hardship. Maybe that's why her expression seemed familiar. It was the same look he saw in his own mirror every morning. When would she be coming out? Next week, if you're interested in meeting her. She could stay at my place, and you two could spend some time together. See if there's any possibility of making this work. And if we don't hit it off, then she goes back to Virginia, and you keep looking for other solutions to your ranch problems. Jake stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the snow-covered pastures where his grandfather used to graze twice as many cattle as Jake could afford to run now. The land was beautiful, rolling hills that stretched to the horizon, broken by stands of pine and aspen trees that turned gold every autumn. It was worth fighting for, but he'd been fighting alone for so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have help. I need time to think about this. Fair enough, but don't take too long. Sarah's got other options she's considering, and Christmas is only 3 weeks away. After Bill left, Jake spent the rest of the afternoon riding the fence line on his horse, checking for breaks, and thinking about the crazy proposition his neighbor had just made. The idea of marrying someone for practical reasons went against everything he'd been raised to believe about love and marriage. His parents had been deeply in love, partners in every sense of the word, and he'd always assumed he'd find the same kind of relationship eventually. But eventually was a luxury he might not be able to afford. The ranch was everything to him, not just his home and livelihood, but his connection to 4 generations of Morrison men who had worked this land, raised their families here, and passed it on to their sons. Was he really going to be the generation that lost it all because he was too romantic to consider a practical marriage? That evening, Jake called his sister Emma from the old rotary phone in the kitchen, the same phone his family had been using for 20 years. "You talked to Bill," he said without preamble when she answered. "I was worried about you, Jake. You've been carrying this burden alone for too long. So you decided to play matchmaker?" Emma sighed on the other end of the line. "I suggested Bill might have some ideas for solving your problems. I didn't know he was going to suggest marriage. What do you think about it? Honestly." There was a long pause before Emma answered. "I think it's crazy. I also think it might be your best option. You're going to lose the ranch anyway, Jake. At least this way you might be able to save it and maybe find some happiness in the process. What if she's terrible? What if we can't stand each other? What if she's wonderful? What if this turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to you?" After he hung up, Jake sat at the kitchen table staring at Sarah's photograph. She had kind eyes, but then again, photographs could lie. People could lie. He'd learned that lesson the hard way with his ex-girlfriend Rebecca, who'd promised to stick by him through the rough times but had left the minute things got difficult. The next morning brought fresh snow and a call from his banker, reminding him that the mortgage payment was now 60 days overdue. Jake listened to the man's polite but firm warnings about the consequences of continued non-payment, promised to have something worked out soon, and hung up feeling like he was drowning in an ocean of debt and dwindling options. He spent the day in the barn, working on an old tractor that should have been replaced 5 years ago. The repetitive work of disassembling and cleaning engine parts gave his hands something to do, while his mind wrestled with Bill's proposition. By the time the sun was setting behind the western mountains, he'd made his decision. Jake walked into the house, cleaned the grease from his hands, and picked up the phone. Bill answered on the second ring. "I'll meet her," Jake said. "When can she be here?" "I'll call her tonight. If I know Sarah, she'll be on a plane by the weekend. Bill, I want to be clear about something. I'm willing to meet her, maybe even consider this arrangement. But I won't make any promises I can't keep. If we get married, I want it to have a chance of being real, not just a business partnership with wedding rings. That's all any of us can ask for, son. Give it an honest chance and see what happens." Jake hung up the phone and looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of his family's home for over a century. The room was filled with memories, his mother teaching him to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, his father discussing ranch business over coffee, family gatherings that filled every chair around the old oak table. Maybe it was time to make new memories. Maybe a practical marriage could become something more. Maybe Sarah would turn out to be exactly what he needed, even if she wasn't what he'd planned for. Or maybe he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. But with the ranch hanging in the balance and time running out, Jake realized he'd rather take a chance on an uncertain future than watch his family's legacy disappear without a fight. 3 days later, Bill called with the news that Sarah would arrive on Friday afternoon, just 10 days before Christmas. She'd stay at the Lazy H Ranch for a week, giving them time to get acquainted and decide if they could make a marriage work. Jake spent the intervening days cleaning the ranch house from top to bottom, fixing things that had been broken for months, and trying to make the place presentable for a woman who might become his wife. He'd never been so nervous about meeting someone in his life, but then again he'd never had so much riding on a first impression. As Friday afternoon approached, Jake found himself standing on his porch again, but this time he wasn't holding a foreclosure notice. This time he was holding a photograph of a woman who might be his salvation, wondering if he was about to meet his future wife or simply delay his inevitable failure by a few months. The sound of tires on gravel announced Bill's return, and Jake's heart began to race as he spotted a woman's silhouette in the passenger seat. Sarah was here, and his life was about to change forever. He just hoped it would be for the better. Sarah Matthews stepped out of Bill's pickup truck and took her first deep breath of Montana air. It was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of snow and pine trees, so different from the humid Virginia air she'd grown accustomed to. The mountains in the distance took her breath away, jagged peaks covered in snow that caught the afternoon sunlight like diamonds. "Jake, I'd like you to meet my niece Sarah," Bill said, his voice carrying a note of pride and nervousness. Jake stepped forward, his hat in his hands, and Sarah got her first real look at the man who might become her husband. He was taller than she'd expected, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders and the kind of lean strength that came from years of physical work. His brown hair was slightly longer than fashionable, and his blue eyes held a mixture of curiosity and caution. He was handsome in a rugged way, but it was the gentleness in his expression that put her at ease. "Ma'am," Jake said, extending his hand, "welcome to Montana." Sarah shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the surprising warmth of his grip. "Thank you. It's beautiful here. I can see why your family never wanted to leave." They stood there for a moment, sizing each other up like two horses meeting for the first time. Sarah had been nervous about this meeting for days, but something about Jake's straightforward manner and genuine smile helped her relax. He wasn't trying to impress her or put on a show. He was just being himself. "Would you like to see the ranch?" Jake asked. "I could give you a tour before the sun sets." "I'd love that." Bill excused himself, claiming he needed to get back to his own chores, but not before giving Sarah a meaningful look that said, "Give this a chance." She nodded almost imperceptibly, understanding his message. Jake led her to his pickup, an older Ford that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. As they drove across the property, he pointed out various landmarks and explained the ranch's layout. Sarah listened carefully, asking intelligent questions about cattle rotations, water sources, and winter feeding strategies. "You really do know ranching," Jake said, impressed by her understanding of the complexities involved in running a cattle operation. "My uncle's place in Virginia is smaller, but many of the principles are the same. Though I have to admit, the scale here is intimidating. 800 acres is massive compared to what I'm used to." They stopped at a ridge that overlooked most of the ranch, and Jake turned off the engine. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind through the pine trees and the distant lowing of cattle. "It's going to be hard to lose this," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying years of pain and frustration. Sarah studied his profile as he stared out at the land. There was something noble about his attachment to this place, something that spoke to her own deep need for belonging. "Tell me about your family's history here." For the next hour, as the sun began to set behind the mountains, Jake told her stories about his great-grandfather who'd homesteaded the land, his grandfather who'd survived the Depression by diversifying into sheep for a few years, his father who'd modernized the operation in the 1980s, and his own dreams of building something even better. "What about you?" Jake asked eventually. "Bill mentioned you'd been through a difficult divorce." Sarah's expression tightened slightly. "My ex-husband was charming, ambitious, and completely without principles. He convinced me to invest my inheritance from my grandmother into his real estate ventures. When everything collapsed, he somehow managed to keep most of the assets while I got stuck with most of the debts. The divorce took 2 years and cost me everything I had left." "I'm sorry. That must have been devastating." "It was. But it also taught me some valuable lessons about trust, about people, and about taking care of myself. I won't make those mistakes again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last light fade from the sky. Sarah found herself surprisingly comfortable with this quiet man who carried such obvious burdens. There was an integrity about him that her ex-husband had lacked, a straightforwardness that she found deeply appealing. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said eventually. "Shoot. Are you doing this just to save the ranch? Or is there some part of you that actually wants to get married?" Jake was quiet for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, both. I won't lie to you, Sarah. I need help saving this place, and marriage to you could provide that help. But I'm 32 years old, and I'd like to have a family someday. My last relationship ended because she couldn't handle the uncertainty and the hard work that comes with ranch life. Maybe a partnership that starts with understanding those realities would have a better chance of success than one that starts with just romance." Sarah appreciated his honesty. "I want children too someday. And I want a partner, not just a husband. Someone who respects what I bring to the relationship, not someone who sees me as just a solution to their problems." "What do you bring, besides the obvious financial help?" Sarah smiled. "I'm an excellent cook. I can handle bookkeeping. I'm good with horses and cattle, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I'm also stubborn as hell when I believe in something, which could be an asset or a liability depending on the situation." Jake laughed. "Sounds like you'd fit right in with the Morrison family. We've never been accused of giving up easily." Over the next 3 days, they spent most of their time together. Jake showed her every aspect of the ranch operation, from checking cattle in the far pastures to repairing fence line damaged by the recent snow. Sarah proved herself capable and knowledgeable, impressing Jake with her ability to read cattle and her instinctive understanding of ranch logistics. In the evenings, they sat by the fire in Jake's living room, drinking coffee and talking about their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future. Sarah told him about her childhood on various military bases as her father moved from assignment to assignment, how she'd always longed for a place to call home permanently. Jake shared his fears about being the generation that lost the family ranch, about failing to live up to his ancestors' legacy. "You know," Sarah said on their third evening together, "you talk about your family's legacy as if it's just about keeping the land. But maybe the real legacy is the values they pass down, the work ethic, the connection to the land, the commitment to doing what's right. Those things don't disappear just because you lose some acreage." Jake looked at her with new respect. "That's probably the wisest thing anyone's said to me in months. My grandmother used to say that home isn't a place, it's the people who make you feel like you belong. Maybe that's what we're really talking about here, creating a sense of belonging for both of us." On the fourth day, they drove into town together to pick up supplies and let Sarah see the small community she might be joining. Sunset Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and Jake's appearance with an unfamiliar woman created quite a stir. At the hardware store, old Pete Kowalski looked Sarah up and down appraisingly. "You Jake's new girlfriend?" he asked with the directness of a man who'd lived in small towns his whole life. "We're getting acquainted," Sarah answered diplomatically. "Well, you picked a good man, even if his timing could be better," Pete said, oblivious to the subtle implications of his comment. At the grocery store, they ran into Mary Henderson, the bank president's wife, who made polite conversation while obviously trying to figure out who Sarah was and why she was with Jake. Sarah handled the interaction gracefully, neither too friendly nor too standoffish. "This town loves its gossip," Jake said as they loaded groceries into his truck. "Every small town does. The question is whether they gossip because they care or because they're bored. Little of both, probably. But they're good people when it matters. When my dad died, half the town showed up to help with the funeral and the ranch work." That evening, as they prepared dinner together in Jake's kitchen, Sarah noticed how naturally they worked as a team. He chopped vegetables while she seasoned the steaks. They moved around each other without getting in the way, and the conversation flowed easily. It felt surprisingly domestic and comfortable. "I have something to tell you," Sarah said as they sat down to eat. Something I probably should have mentioned before now. Jake looked up from his plate, suddenly alert. What is it? I have some experience with business turnarounds. Before I got married, I worked for a consulting firm that specialized in helping struggling agricultural operations become profitable again. I've seen situations like yours before, and they're usually solutions that don't require selling the land. What kind of solutions? Diversification mostly. Alternative revenue streams that take advantage of your existing assets and infrastructure. Agritourism, specialty livestock, value-added products, direct marketing to consumers. The key is finding the right niche for your specific situation. Jake set down his fork. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I wanted you to get to know me as a person first, not as a potential business consultant. And because I wanted to understand your operation before making any suggestions. And now that you understand it? Sarah took a deep breath. I think this ranch has tremendous potential for profitability, but it would require some significant changes in how you approach the business. The question is whether you'd be willing to try some unconventional strategies. What kind of unconventional strategies? That's a longer conversation. But, Jake, I want you to know that my interest in marrying you isn't just about finding a place to belong. I genuinely believe we could make this ranch successful again, both financially and personally. Jake studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or manipulation. Instead, he saw excitement, intelligence, and something that looked like genuine affection. You're full of surprises, aren't you? I hope they're good surprises. So far, they have been. The next morning, Sarah asked if she could look at the ranch's financial records. Jake hesitated. The numbers were embarrassing, a clear record of his failures over the past 2 years. But Sarah had been honest with him about her own financial disasters, and he decided to return the favor. They spread the ledgers and bank statements across the kitchen table, and Sarah studied them with the focused attention of someone who understood both agriculture and business. Jake watched her face as she absorbed the full scope of his financial troubles, preparing himself for the moment when she realized just how bad things really were. This is actually better than I expected, she said finally. Better? We're 3 months from foreclosure. But your operational costs are well within normal ranges. Your debt-to-asset ratio is manageable if you can increase revenue. And you've got excellent infrastructure that just needs some creative utilization. Sarah pulled out a notebook and began sketching what looked like a business plan. Tell me about your neighbor relationships. Do you get along with the other ranchers in the area? Mostly. Why? Because collaboration could be key to making some of these ideas work. What about the town? Do they have any tourism infrastructure? Some. There's a guest ranch about 20 miles west, and people come through for fishing and hunting. Nothing major. Sarah nodded, making more notes. What about farmers markets, local restaurants, anything like that? There's a farmers market in Billings, about an hour away. Why all the questions? Because I'm starting to see possibilities. But I need to understand the full picture before I make any recommendations. That afternoon, they drove to several neighboring ranches so Sarah could introduce herself and get a sense of the local agricultural community. Jake was surprised by how easily she connected with his neighbors, asking intelligent questions about their operations and sharing insights from her experience in Virginia. At the Wilson Ranch, they met Tom and Carol Wilson, who ran a successful sheep operation alongside their cattle. Carol took an immediate liking to Sarah, and before they left had extracted a promise that Sarah would come back for coffee regardless of what happened with Jake. She's a keeper, Carol whispered to Jake as they were leaving. Don't let your stubborn pride mess this up. That evening, as they sat by the fire again, Sarah pulled out her notebook and began sharing some of her ideas for transforming the ranch's financial picture. The key is to think beyond just selling cattle, she explained. You've got beautiful land, excellent facilities, and a great location. There are multiple ways to monetize those assets. Like what? Guest ranching, for one. Not on the scale of the big operations, but small groups who want an authentic ranch experience. Hunting and fishing guides, horseback riding, cattle drives for tourists. You could also consider specialty livestock, maybe bison or elk, which command premium prices. Jake listened as she outlined strategies for direct-to-consumer beef sales, value-added products like jerky and sausage, and partnerships with local restaurants for farm-to-table programs. Her ideas were creative and well thought out, based on real experience with similar operations. "It sounds like a lot of work," he said when she finished. "It is, but it's also the kind of work that could make this ranch genuinely profitable instead of just surviving. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk of changing how you've always done things." Jake stared into the fire, considering her words. Everything she'd suggested made sense, but it would mean transforming his family's traditional cattle ranch into something completely different. It felt like betraying his heritage, even if it might save the land. "I need time to think about all this," he said finally. "Of course. But, Jake, there's something else we need to discuss." "What's that?" "If we're really going to do this, get married, we need to decide how we want to handle the personal side of our arrangement." Jake looked at her, suddenly, aware of how the firelight brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. Over the past 5 days, he'd grown genuinely fond of Sarah. She was smart, funny, hardworking, and kind. Under different circumstances, he could imagine falling in love with her quite easily. "What do you mean?" Do we start this as a purely business arrangement and hope feelings develop over time? Do we try to build a friendship first? Do we just jump in and see what happens?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "What do you want?" "I want honesty between us, whatever form this relationship takes. I want mutual respect. And I want the possibility that this could become something real, even if it starts out as something practical. I want the same things. Sarah, I need you to know that I'm attracted to you, not just because you might be able to help save the ranch, but because of who you are. You're the first woman I've met in years who seems to understand what this life is really about." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. "I'm attracted to you too, Jake. You're nothing like what I expected when Bill first told me about this idea. What did you expect? Someone desperate enough to marry a stranger, which usually means someone with serious character flaws. Instead, I found someone who's been dealt a rough hand, but refuses to give up on what matters to him. That's attractive." They moved closer together on the couch, the space between them charged with possibility. When Jake reached out to touch her hand, Sarah didn't pull away. When he leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it deepened as they both realized that their attraction was mutual and genuine. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "So," Jake said, his forehead resting against hers, "I guess we have our answer about the personal side of things." Sarah laughed softly. "I guess vedo." The next morning, they sat at the kitchen table with coffee and the marriage license application they'd picked up in town the day before. It seemed surreal to be filling out paperwork for marriage to someone she'd known for less than a week. But Sarah had learned to trust her instincts about people. And every instinct she had told her that Jake Morrison was a good man worthy of her trust. "So," Jake said as he signed his name with a flourish, "want to get married tomorrow?" Sarah looked at him in surprise. "Tomorrow? Well, we're running out of time if we want a Christmas wedding. And honestly, once I make a decision, I don't see much point in waiting around." Sarah thought about all the reasons to wait, all the conventional wisdom about taking time to really get to know someone before making such a major commitment. Then she thought about the feeling of rightness she'd had since arriving in Montana, the sense that she'd finally found where she belonged. "Yes," she said, signing her name next to his. let's get married tomorrow. The wedding took place on December 22nd in the small Methodist church where 4 generations of Morrisons had been married. Sarah wore a simple cream-colored dress she'd bought in town the day before, and Jake wore his father's wedding suit, carefully preserved by his mother for just such an occasion. The guest list was small: Bill Hendricks as best man, Emma, who'd driven up from Denver to serve as maid of honor, and about 30 neighbors and friends from the community. Pastor Williams, who had officiated at Jake's parents' wedding 35 years earlier, performed the ceremony with the kind of heartfelt sincerity that comes from knowing a family for decades. When he asked Jake to recite his vows, the young rancher's voice was steady and clear. "Sarah, I promise to be honest with you, to work alongside you as a true partner, and to do everything in my power to build a life with you that honors both our dreams and the legacy of this land. I may not be able to promise you riches, but I can promise you my complete commitment to making our marriage and our life together the best it can be." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "Jake, I promise to stand by you through whatever challenges we face, to bring all my skills and resources to our partnership, and to help you build something lasting and meaningful on this land. I promise to make this ranch not just a place we live, but a true home for both of us." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was tender and full of promise. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that she'd never experienced before. This might have started as a practical arrangement, but it already felt like something much more. The reception was held at the community center, with food provided by every family in attendance. Mrs. Patterson brought her famous pot roast. The Kowalskis contributed homemade pierogi in honor of their Polish heritage, and Carol Wilson provided enough desserts to feed twice as many people. It was the kind of community celebration that reminded everyone why small-town life was worth preserving. As they danced their first dance to a country song playing on the old sound system, Jake whispered in Sarah's ear, "No regrets." "None so far," she whispered back. "You. Best decision I've made in years." Their honeymoon was a single night at a bed and breakfast in Billings, followed by a return to the ranch to begin their life together. Sarah had moved her belongings from Bill's ranch into Jake's house, and they spent their first week as a married couple learning to share space and make decisions together. The transition was surprisingly smooth. They both woke before dawn, both preferred coffee black and strong, and both believed in getting the hard work done before taking time for personal matters. Sarah proved to be an excellent cook, while Jake handled most of the heavy maintenance tasks around the ranch. They fell into a comfortable rhythm that felt natural and sustainable, but the financial pressures remained. The foreclosure deadline was now less than 10 weeks away, and despite Sarah's business ideas, implementing them would take time they didn't have. Jake tried to hide his growing anxiety, but Sarah could see the worry lines deepening around his eyes. "We need to talk," she said one evening in mid-January as they sat at the kitchen table reviewing bills. "There's something I haven't told you." Jake looked up from the stack of overdue notices, his stomach clenching. In his experience, conversations that started with "there's something I haven't told you" rarely ended well. "What is it?" Sarah took a deep breath. "When my grandmother died 5 years ago, she left me a trust fund. A substantial one." Jake stared at her. "How substantial?" "Enough to pay off the ranch mortgage and fund the diversification projects we've been talking about." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because my ex-husband found out about the trust fund after we were married. He spent 2 years trying to get his hands on it, claiming it was community property. The trust was set up to protect against exactly that kind of thing, but he made my life hell trying to access it. I swore I'd never let anyone use me for my money again." Jake felt a mix of emotions: relief that salvation might be at hand, hurt that she'd kept such an important secret, and fear that she might think he'd married her just for her money. "Sarah, I need you to know that I didn't marry you because I knew about this trust fund. I married you because I believed we could build a good life together, with or without extra money. I know that. If I thought you were after my money, I never would have married you. But, Jake, I want to use this money to save our ranch. Not just your ranch anymore, our ranch." "How much are we talking about?" $2.3 million. Jake nearly fell off his chair. $2.3 million? Sarah, that's not just substantial, that's life-changing money. You could buy your own ranch, start your own operation anywhere in the country. Why would you want to risk it on a failing cattle ranch in Montana? Sarah reached across the table and took his hands. "Because this isn't just about money, Jake. It's about building something meaningful with someone I care about. I've spent the last 5 years being careful and scared, protecting myself from getting hurt again. But being here with you, working this land, becoming part of this community, it's the first time since my divorce that I felt truly alive. But what if we fail? What if we lose it all anyway? Then at least we'll have tried. Jake, I've been wealthy and miserable, and I've been poor and content. Money doesn't guarantee happiness, but the right partnership can. I believe we have the right partnership." They spent the next hour discussing the practical aspects of accessing the trust fund and paying off the ranch's debts. The legal process would take a few weeks, but Sarah's attorney in Virginia assured her over the phone that the funds could be released quickly given the circumstances. But even with the financial pressure relieved, they still needed to address the ranch's fundamental profitability problem. Having enough money to pay off the mortgage was one thing. Making the ranch self-sustaining was another. "I've been thinking about your diversification ideas," Jake said. "The guest ranch concept, especially. We've got that old bunkhouse that could be renovated, and the scenery is certainly beautiful enough. I've been thinking about it too, but I have an idea that might be even better, something that builds on my experience in Virginia." "What's that?" "Therapeutic horseback riding. My uncle's operation in Virginia included a program for children with disabilities and adults recovering from injuries or trauma. It's a growing field, and there's nothing like it within 200 miles of here." Jake looked intrigued. "Tell me more." Sarah's eyes lit up as she began explaining the concept. Equine-assisted therapy is used for everything from autism and cerebral palsy to PTSD and addiction recovery. The income potential is excellent. It provides a genuine service to the community, and it would allow us to utilize our horses and facilities in a completely different way. What would we need to get started? Specialized training for both of us, some facility modifications, certified therapy horses, and partnerships with healthcare providers and social service agencies. It's a significant investment, but the long-term potential is enormous. They talked late into the night about the possibilities. Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious, and Jake found himself getting excited about the ranch's future for the first time in years. This wasn't just about saving the family land anymore. It was about creating something entirely new and meaningful. The next morning, Sarah made a call to her former colleague from the consulting firm, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who had specialized in equine therapy programs. Within an hour, they had a detailed conversation about the requirements for establishing a therapeutic riding center. "Montana would be perfect for this," Dr. Martinez told Sarah. "There's a huge underserved population in the rural Mountain West, and the natural setting you're describing would be ideal for therapy work. I could connect you with the certification programs you'd need, and I might even be able to help you apply for grants to fund the startup costs." Over the next month, Sarah and Jake threw themselves into planning their ranch transformation. They researched certification requirements, visited existing therapy programs in Colorado and Wyoming, and began the process of converting part of their operation to accommodate therapeutic riding. The trust fund money was released in early February, and Jake felt an overwhelming sense of relief as he made the final payment on the ranch mortgage. For the first time in 2 years, he owned his family's land free and clear. But more importantly, he and Sarah were building something together that felt like a true partnership. You know what the best part of this is? Sarah asked one evening as they reviewed architectural plans for the new therapy facility. What's that? We're not just saving your family's ranch. We're creating our family's ranch. Our children will grow up here knowing that their parents built something meaningful together. Jake pulled her into his arms. Our children. I'm hoping for at least 2, maybe 3. I figure we've got plenty of room for them to roam around. Their first kiss as a truly committed couple, free from the shadow of financial desperation, was everything Jake had hoped their marriage could become. What had started as a practical arrangement had blossomed into genuine love and partnership. The therapeutic riding program opened in June, just 6 months after their wedding. Sarah had completed her certification as an equine therapy instructor, and Jake had learned to work with clients who had various physical and emotional challenges. Their first group of clients included 3 children with autism from Billings, 2 veterans dealing with PTSD, and an elderly woman recovering from a stroke. Watching Sarah work with their clients, Jake marveled at her patience and skill. She had an intuitive understanding of how to match horses with riders, how to create safe spaces for emotional healing, and how to build confidence in people who had often been told they couldn't do things. Mrs. Patterson's grandson has been asking about the program, Sarah told Jake one evening. Tommy's been struggling since his dad deployed overseas. She thinks the horses might help him process some of his anxiety. What do you think? I think we should give him a trial session and see how he responds. Sometimes the kids who seem most resistant are the ones who benefit most. The program grew steadily throughout the summer. Word spread through the network of healthcare providers, social workers, and veteran support groups across the region. By fall, they had a waiting list for their services and were considering expanding their facility to accommodate more clients. The traditional cattle operation continued as well, though on a smaller scale than in previous generations. Jake kept a core herd of high-quality breeding stock and focused on direct-to-consumer sales of premium beef to restaurants and families in Billings and Bozeman. The combination of therapy program income and boutique beef sales generated more profit than the ranch had seen in decades. I never thought I'd say this, Jake confessed to Sarah as they watched the sunset from their favorite ridge one evening in September. But losing the big cattle operation might have been the best thing that ever happened to this place. Why do you say that? Because it forced us to think creatively, to find new ways to use the land that actually serve people better than just raising cattle for commodity markets. Your therapy program is changing lives, Sarah. That's worth more than any number of head of cattle. Sarah leaned against his shoulder. Our therapy program. This only works because we're doing it together. As their first Christmas as a married couple approached, Jake and Sarah reflected on the remarkable year they'd shared. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a failing ranch had become the foundation for a thriving business and a genuinely happy marriage. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Bill hadn't made that crazy suggestion? Sarah asked as they decorated the Christmas tree in their living room. I try not to think about it. I probably would have lost the ranch, moved to town, and spent the rest of my life regretting what I'd given up. And I probably would have stayed in Virginia, helping my uncle with his horses, never taking any real risks or building anything of my own. Jake wrapped his arms around his wife, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. So we're both grateful for crazy Uncle Bill and his matchmaking schemes. Incredibly grateful. Though I still can't believe he thought arranging a marriage was a reasonable solution to your financial problems. It was a reasonable solution. It just turned out to be much more than a solution. It turned out to be exactly what we both needed. Their second Christmas Eve found them hosting dinner for Bill Emma, and several neighbors who had become close friends over the past year. The old house was filled with laughter, good food, and the kind of warmth that comes from genuine community connections. As Jake looked around the table at the people who had become their chosen family, he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected turns his life had taken. The ranch was financially secure. Their therapy program was making a real difference in people's lives. And he was married to a woman who challenged him, supported him, and loved him completely. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, raising his glass of wine, "to unexpected blessings, second chances, and the courage to take risks on what matters most." "To Sarah," Bill added with a grin, "for being crazy enough to marry this stubborn rancher sight unseen." "To Jake," Sarah replied, "for being exactly the man I didn't know I was looking for." As they clinked glasses around the table, Jake caught Sarah's eye and saw his own happiness reflected there. They had saved the ranch, but more importantly, they had found each other. The land that had been in his family for 4 generations would continue for at least one more. But now it would be shaped by new traditions, new purposes, and the combined dreams of 2 people who had found their home in each other. Outside, snow began to fall gently on the Montana landscape, covering the pastures and buildings in a blanket of pristine white. Inside, the Morrison family ranch, now the Morrison Matthews family ranch, hummed with the warmth and energy of lives well lived and dreams fulfilled. The foreclosure notice that had once terrified Jake was now framed in his office, not as a reminder of failure, but as a symbol of how dramatically life could change when you were brave enough to trust in unexpected possibilities. Next to it hung their wedding photo and a picture of Sarah working with her first therapy client, a young boy with autism who had spoken his first words while sitting on the back of their gentle mare, Buttercup. Sarah's secret hadn't just saved the ranch. It had transformed it into something better than it had ever been before. But the real secret, they both knew, wasn't the trust fund money. The real secret was the power of 2 people committed to building something meaningful together, the magic that happened when individual dreams merged into shared purpose, and the truth that sometimes the best solutions to life's problems came from the most unexpected places. As the evening wound down and their guests began to head home through the falling snow, Jake and Sarah stood on their porch, arms around each other, looking out at the land that was now truly theirs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new dreams to pursue together. But tonight they were simply grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment, this place, this life they had built from a desperate idea and unexpected love.